Welcome to another episode of Coffee with Andrius, and this time we are looking back at one of the races I did back in September called the Blue Lake Challenge, and we'll talk about nutrition and race strategy during that event.
Ooh, there's my coffee.
I think it was end of September that we went down to Rotorua for this particular event, and just for a bit of context, 100 Ks you decided to run for basically in preparation for a 100 miler, which didn't eventuate. It was in the schedule for December, but it didn't quite happen.
I guess the Blue Lake Challenge was a perfect outlet for playing with exactly nutrition and race strategy, because the race setup is so that you run around the lake on the same course, so 6 kilometer course around the lake. So every time you come back to the base, you can access your gear, you can access your nutrition, you can control your pace much better than in other events because you're running on the same course. So
just in terms of the race itself, so you did 100 kilometers, which was about 17 laps, is that right?
So the mug challenge, or called the mug, was 17 laps, and each lap was almost 6 kilometers long, so that makes 100 kilometers.
And how long did it take you?
Well, it took me 10 hours 46 minutes.
So one of the important things to recognize and to think about even when approaching your own events and your own nutrition is that context is everything. So considering things like the duration of your event, whether that's both distance and time that you expect to complete the event in, whether how often you'll actually have access to food, whether you've got to carry it with you or not, all those kinds of things, and actually the intensity that you're running at, because the reality is in a lot of endurance events you're not going at your 10k race pace or your marathon pace, and that changes the way you should approach your nutrition in many cases. So for this particular event, what were your goals, and what sort of things were you experimenting with or trying to achieve with your nutrition?
If that was a full-on race, and if I knew that I can push a whole 100 kilometer distance, I probably would rely more on really fast energy coming from hydration. But this time, as you say, because it was like a bit more as a training run, I knew that I will mix quite a lot of solid food as well into my nutrition. So every time I run 100 kilometers, nutrition depends on the intensity and the goals of that race. So it's never the same, and it's important to learn slowly sometimes to read those contexts and plan accordingly, depending on whether that's a race, training run, how fast is the race, or how technical as well can dictate what your nutrition will be for that event.
So should we dive into what you actually ate? Because the great thing about this setup was you had a little tent pitched up, we brought in your food the morning of the race, and you could effectively take an inventory of what you'd eaten throughout the day.
Bananas, always good training and race nutrition fuel. Then I had Rome energy nut butter, so 4 packs of that. So energy nut butter, so almond cashew nut butter, high calorie, low carb, high fat and high proteins. Nut butter sits in the stomach a bit longer, and again it acts as a filter for other energy coming into the gut. So in some way reducing gastrointestinal distress when consumed correctly. I had 2 bars of just a regular nut bars.
From the supermarket?
Yeah, that you can buy in the supermarket. Then I had 1 muffin, which I had with my coffee, somewhere in the middle of the race. And again, I kind of split the muffin into thirds. I think it was a bit of a kind of reward thing, stopping at the end of the lap and having a bit of muffin and coffee. Then I had a Coke of can.
A Coke of can or a can of Coke?
A can of Coke. I had Coke. And that was not a diet one, like just a regular sugar Coke. And I think I consumed, as I remember, at the end, closer to the end of the race. Then I had some, probably the best quality bag of lollies. Actually, I didn't have like a full bag. It's more like a half bag of lollies. Then I had almost 4 liters of electrolyte drink, which was a mix of carbs and salts. In overall, as I calculated, I was getting almost 340 calories per hour of energy. Well, I mean, it really depends. Like the longer the race becomes, or the faster the race is, more competitive the race is, you kind of want to consume as much as you can. But the limitation is obviously how much your guts can absorb and how susceptible you are for the gastrointestinal distress. It's a bit of a balance, like consuming enough that you can compete or run at your desired intensity and feel good, energetic, but at the same time preventing all the troubles that can come with that.
Which are pretty common in these types of events. I think it's something that's often underestimated when planning your event on, your time, your pace. You kind of have a rough idea of what foods you like, how you consume them, but sometimes just gastro distress strikes and there's not much that you can do about it, and it can spell the end of your race or event really. And it's a shame because you put in all this other work to get to the start line, and it's just a concoction of what you consume on the day, which sort of makes all the wheels fall off and creates quite a bad experience.
Knowing that it would take me from 35 to 40 minutes to complete each lap, that gave me some sort of a framework to work. So one thing I decided, so that every time I leave my aid station, I would have like a full 1 flask of hydration, which is 500-600 milliliters. And before I come back to that aid station, I will have to consume that.
So is that
that was electrolyte.
Electrolyte.
Yeah,
so
that was
with calories, basically.
Yes, and so it was kind of aligned really well with race goals and just a kind of a small personal discipline of consuming water when you run. The next thing, how I planned my nutrition, was thinking how should I distribute carbohydrate-rich foods and fat and protein-rich foods. I decided to alternate a bit more between carb and non-carb options between laps. So if one lap would be, let's say, banana lollies and electrolyte drink, maybe next lap I would go with a nut butter, Rome energy nut butter, coffee, and a bit of electrolyte drink.
At the end of the race, you were feeling great. You'd had a good run at a nice even intensity, evenly paced, well fueled. Then tragedy kind of struck later that evening at home. you were quite unwell. You were feeling a bit nauseous. What happened there?
And there are certain things that you have to do and prevent any issues and problems happening to your body. So one of them is ensuring that after the race you hydrate well. After the race we all kind of tend to be a bit hungry and start eating, different foods, and usually carb-rich foods. And this is how muscle glycogen is reconstituted in a muscle. But for that process, we need water as well. So essentially what I'm kind of leaning into, I want to say that it is possible to almost dehydrate in the recovery process after the race if...
And that's exactly what happened, right?
Yeah.
So you kind of finished up, and then you kind of got caught up in the, post-race, you're talking with a few people, you kind of arrive at the finish line, not at your tent, and there's not that motivation to be like, oh yeah, I'll chug some water down.
Yeah.
And that was a piece that was kind of missing.
Yeah.
You didn't do that, and then, later on that sort of compounds if it's, push it out an hour, 2 hours, and you're still not getting enough water in.
Yeah.
That's when you're going to start to have those issues.
That time, yeah.
Then throw a burger and chips in there, and it's just not going to work.
Yeah.
Or what did you learn that you will continue to apply to future long, endurance events?
I mean, personally, I learned that being a bit more disciplined with nutrition, it is possible to achieve relatively high energy intake during the race without actually experiencing any bad, gastrointestinal problems. I am probably one of many runners that tends to underconsume. So for me, achieving more than 300 calories an hour was actually quite revealing that I can do this, my body can do this. I'm definitely kind of will look at future ultra distance challenges and events with different eyes and different plan, more structured plan.
Well, we hope you guys found this useful, especially for some of you that are going into running events like Tarawera Ultra or doing Coast to Coast in the month or two ahead. Now's the perfect time to start testing different nutrition on your runs and other training sessions. So we hope you found this useful.
Finding traffic. Yeah. We're good?
Any more? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.